In the glittering halls of Tudor England, love could be the most dangerous game of all. A single smile could change your destiny. A single rumor could end your life. And for one young queen, both would come true. Her name was Catherine Howard. She was only a teenager when she caught the eye of one of the most powerful and feared men in the world, King Henry VIII. To history, she's remembered as the foolish girl who betrayed the king and paid the ultimate price. But behind that tragic story lies something far more human. A girl who was barely more than a child, thrust into a world of politics, power, and manipulation she could never fully control. Today, we'll look past the myths and court gossip to uncover the real Catherine Howard, the queen who died for love. Catherine Howard was born around 1523 into a noble but struggling branch of one of England's most powerful families, the Howards. Her father, Lord Edmund Howard, was a younger son of the Duke of Norfolk, a man with influence but little wealth to pass on. Her mother, Joyce Culpeper, died when Catherine was still a child, leaving her to be raised in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. The Duchess's household was large, lively, and chaotic, filled with wards, servants, and young women from noble families who were sent there to learn courtly manners. But it was far from a convent. The supervision was loose. The young girls mixed freely with the male attendants, and romances, some innocent, some not, flourished in the shadows. Catherine grew up amid this freedom, laughing and dancing to the sound of the lute, teasing the young men who served the household. She was known for her beauty, a delicate face, fair skin, chestnut hair, and a bright, musical laugh. Those who met her described her as charming, affectionate, and endlessly cheerful. But beneath that joy was a naivety that would one day destroy her. While still in her early teens, Catherine was courted by her music teacher, Henry Mannix, and later by a young nobleman named Francis Derham. Both men were older, and both relationships crossed boundaries that, in the eyes of Tudor morality, would one day haunt her. Letters she wrote at the time show a girl caught between girlish affection and the hunger for love and validation. Emotions every young person knows, but which, for a future queen, would prove fatal. By 1539, her fortunes changed. Her powerful uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, the same man who had once pushed Anne Boleyn into the king's path, saw another opportunity in his young niece. At this time, Henry VIII was unhappily married to Anne of Cleves, a political union that had turned into personal embarrassment. Catherine, with her youth and sweetness, was the perfect distraction. She entered court as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne, her beauty immediately drawing attention. But one pair of eyes watched her more intently than any other, the king's. Henry was nearing 50, overweight, plagued by leg ulcers, and increasingly insecure about his fading youth. Catherine, barely 17, represented everything he had lost: innocence, vitality, beauty. For the young woman who had grown up craving affection, the king's attention must have felt like a dream. He showered her with gifts, jewels, gowns, and compliments. He called her his rose without a thorn. And in the summer of 1540, after casting aside Anne of Cleves, he married her. Catherine Howard became Queen of England. But behind the glittering crown, a tragedy was already unfolding. Because the very qualities that made her irresistible to the king, her warmth, her spontaneity, her need to be loved, would soon become the weapons used to destroy her. Catherine Howard's rise was dazzling and dangerously fast. Almost overnight, she went from a carefree court maiden to the most powerful woman in England. Her name was sung in ballads, her portrait painted beside the king's, and her youth became the talk of every noble house in Europe. But beneath the shimmering surface, cracks were already forming. Henry adored her. To him, Catherine was not just a wife. She was a symbol of rebirth. He threw grand feasts in her honor, presented her with jewels worth fortunes, and paraded her like a prize before foreign ambassadors. At every public appearance, She smiled radiantly, holding his arm with practiced grace. To the outside world, it looked like the fairy tale marriage Henry had always wanted, but in private, it was something else entirely. Henry's health was deteriorating rapidly. His leg ulcers were infected, his moods volatile, his temper unpredictable. Those closest to him whispered that the king's passion had turned into possessive obsession. Catherine, still barely more than a teenager, was trapped in the gilded prison of Henry's affection. Adored one moment, scrutinized the next. She did her best to play the part of the perfect queen, kind, generous, pious. She sent alms to the poor, distributed gifts to servants, and charmed the courtiers who had once feared her predecessor's coldness. But the court was a dangerous place for any woman, and especially for one as young and inexperienced as Catherine. Every glance, every word, every letter was watched, weighed, and whispered about. Still, Catherine had a gift for joy. She danced when the musicians played, laughed loudly in the gardens, and adored her ladies-in-waiting. To her, court life was a dream, glittering, exciting, full of promise. And perhaps for a time, she truly believed that her story would be different. But her past, the one she thought she had left behind, was about to resurface. Not long after her marriage, her old flame Francis Derham appeared at court. He boldly sought a position in her household, claiming familiarity and leverage. Catherine was terrified. He knew everything: their letters, their words, their nights together in the Duchess of Norfolk's household. If the king ever found out, she would be ruined. So she did what she thought would protect her. She gave Derham a position in her service, hoping to buy his silence. But it was a fatal mistake. Soon whispers began to spread through the corridors of Whitehall. Why had the Queen appointed a man she had known from her youth? Why did she blush when he approached her? In a court where secrets were currency, it was only a matter of time before someone cashed in. As if fate hadn't already set enough traps, another man entered her life. Thomas Culpeper. He was young, handsome, and a trusted member of the king's privy chamber. Theirs was a dangerous attraction, one that grew in stolen glances and whispered conversations. We don't know exactly when their relationship began, but letters that survive tell us that it was deeply emotional and reckless. In one of the most haunting letters ever written by a Tudor queen, Catherine confessed, "I never longed so much for anything as I do to see you and to speak with you. It makes my heart die to think I cannot always be in your company." It was the letter of a girl in love, not a schemer, not a traitor, just a girl. But love, in the court of Henry VIII, was a dangerous word. By 1541, just a year after her coronation, the king's adoration began to fade into distance. His health grew worse, his energy drained, and Catherine found herself lonely in her palaces of gold. She turned to Culpeper for comfort, and that was when the walls finally began to close in. In late autumn, rumors of the Queen's behavior reached the ears of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. At first, the king refused to believe them. His rose without a thorn could not betray him. But the evidence mounted, witnesses from her youth came forward, her old letters were found, and servants began whispering about secret meetings. The truth, or something close to it, began to emerge, and Henry's love curdled into rage. In the same palace where he had once kissed her hands and called her his treasure, he now thundered that she was a harlot, an ungrateful child, a woman not fit to live. And Catherine, the teenage girl who had once dreamed of love, now faced the terrifying reality of Tudor justice. The end began quietly. In November 1541, while the court celebrated All Saints' Day, Catherine Howard was in her private chapel at Hampton Court Palace when the first whispers reached her. She didn't yet know that the Archbishop of Canterbury had just placed a folded letter into the king's hands, a letter that would seal her fate. The letter contained accusations that the young queen had been unchaste and wanton before her marriage. Henry read it in disbelief. His face turned pale, his hands trembled. For a moment, he refused to accept it. Then, as his pride caught up with his shock, disbelief turned to fury. He left the chapel without a word and locked himself in his chambers, refusing to eat or speak for hours. When Catherine learned that her past had been exposed, she panicked. Servants described her as frantic, running through her apartment, screaming, begging to see the king. She pleaded for mercy, insisting that she had done nothing wrong since her marriage. "Tell the king I am his true wife," she cried. "I loved none but him." But Henry would not listen. To him, betrayal was unforgivable, especially now when his pride and aging body were all he had left to cling to. He ordered that she be placed under guard and that her rooms at Hampton Court be sealed. According to legend, Catherine broke free from her attendants and ran barefoot through the long gallery, desperate to reach the chapel where Henry was praying. She screamed his name, pounding on the door, begging for an audience, but the guards dragged her away before she could reach him. That image, a young woman crying for mercy, her voice echoing down the marble halls, became one of the most haunting stories in Tudor history. Whether it happened exactly that way or not, it captures the truth of her tragedy. A girl, alone and terrified, trapped in the machinery of royal power. The investigation deepened. Francis Derham, the man from her past, was arrested first. He confessed to a pre-contract, a sort of informal marriage, but swore that their relationship had ended before she became queen. Thomas Culpeper was next. Under torture, he admitted to private meetings with Catherine, though he never confessed to adultery. Catherine herself was questioned for days. She denied being unfaithful to the king after their wedding, but her words fell on deaf ears. In Henry's mind, her sins of youth were enough to condemn her. On December 10, 1541, Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper were executed at Tyburn. Derham's death was slow and brutal, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Culpeper, perhaps spared for his noble birth, was beheaded. Their heads were placed on spikes atop London Bridge as a warning to all. Catherine's fate was sealed soon after. In February 1542, Parliament passed a new law making it treason for a queen to conceal her unchaste life before marriage to the king. It was a law written specifically for her. Without even the formality of a trial, Catherine Howard was sentenced to death. She was only about 19 years old. The night before her execution, Catherine was taken to the Tower of London. Eyewitnesses said she seemed calm, far calmer than the courtiers who came to witness her final hours. She asked for the block to be brought to her cell so that she could practice kneeling before it. It was an act not of vanity, but of courage. She wanted to meet her death with dignity. At dawn on February 13, 1542, she walked out into the cold morning light. The courtyard of the Tower was silent except for the sound of footsteps and wind. She wore a black velvet gown, her hair pinned neatly beneath a white cap. She gave a brief speech, declaring that she deserved to die and asking forgiveness of God and the king. Her voice was steady. Then she knelt. The executioner raised his axe, and in one swift motion, it was done. The girl who had been the king's rose without a thorn was gone. Her body was buried near Anne Boleyn's, her cousin, in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, the same resting place for so many victims of Henry's rage. In the days that followed, the court moved on. The tapestries were changed, the songs stopped. But something in Henry broke after Catherine's death. Those who saw him said he aged 10 years in a single season. He avoided Hampton Court, the palace where he had once danced with her, and spoke her name only rarely. He would marry once more before his death, but never again with passion. Catherine Howard had been the last flicker of youth in his long, brutal reign. And when that flame went out, darkness followed. Today, nearly 5 centuries later, her ghost is said to still haunt the gallery at Hampton Court, the same hall where she once ran, barefoot and crying for mercy. Visitors claim to hear footsteps, sobs, the faint echo of a girl calling out for love that would never save her. But maybe Catherine Howard's story isn't just one of tragedy. Maybe it's also a reminder of what happens when innocence meets power, when love collides with politics, and when history reduces a living, feeling girl to a single fatal mistake. She wasn't the schemer that many painted her to be. She wasn't the seductress or the villain. She was, at her heart, a child born into a game too cruel to understand. And though her life ended too soon, her memory endures, not as the harlot queen, but as the teenager who dared to love in a world where love could kill you.